Penny Thornton, welcome to the Great Big Book Club. How are you?
I'm good, and how are you?
Fine, I'm fine. How is your lockdown progressing?
Well, we're in Sweden.
Oh,
What lockdown? Um, well, I'm in a very fortunate position. We have a summer house, and it's on the archipelago, which is about 25 minutes outside Stockholm itself. So we're right out in the forest by a lake. So it's all very beautiful, and not a lot of people just yet. People not getting their boats out just yet, but they will when the sun starts to shine. But otherwise, everything is pretty well as it always is here.
so tell me about this thing. What is the Gemini season?
Well, it's really related to the fact that the North Node is moving back into the sign of Gemini. Now, the moon's nodes are the point where the moon intersects with, it sounds very fancy, the ecliptic is the path of the sun. It's how we see things from, the perception of Earth. But that point where the moon's nodes cross is a very sensitive point, and the sun also will cross over those points at different intervals during the course of a year, and over the next 18 months it'll do so 5 or 6 times, and it changes its sign every 18 months. I mean, it moves all the time, but you'll cross into another sign every 18 months. So it's been 18 and a bit years since the North Node has been in Gemini. And because it's an axis, it's got an opposite point, which is in Sagittarius. And it means that the eclipses fall on that axis. You've got eclipses in Gemini or Sagittarius. And again, looking at why is this important? Well, since time began, probably, and anybody could look up at the sky and see the sun and the moon and all the constellations, it's, the presence or the onset of a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse was a dramatic thing. A solar eclipse, day turns to night. So suddenly you've lost the light, you've lost the warmth of the sun, terrifying. And even a lunar eclipse where you see the moon eclipsed or chunks taken out of it like a piece of cheese, it's still unusual. And as soon as, we get to the Babylonians, for instance, who started to really make extraordinary accurate calculations, they started to calculate when eclipses would happen. And at the same time, they became kind of heralds of major events like the birth of a king, the death of a king, a war, a pestilence. They have lots of things to tell us, really, I think. And even though, modern astrologers are much more psychologically oriented, we think of things to do with astrology in a way that gives the power back to us. So we see the movements of the planets as mirrors of life on Earth and give us, again, back control. Even so, eclipses are rather dramatic things, and they tend to coincide with major world events. In fact, I will go on, but if it's boring.
No, 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 no. I was just wondering. So we've had obviously the COVID pandemic, and we're in the midst of the COVID pandemic. What is the significance of this particular eclipse then?
Yeah, well, they come in pairs. I mean, eclipses are cycles in themselves, but I think it's important to note that the eclipse that happened on the 10th of January, which was bang on the moment we had a major alignment between Saturn and Pluto. I mean, most astrologers had looked at this point and thought, something mega is about to happen globally. So I think, if you're a decent enough astrologer, you would definitely have said something's going to happen, even if you weren't 100% sure what it was. So when we come to these next series of eclipses, there will be developments linked to what happened in January. So it'll be a very important turning point for the coronavirus as we get into June. June the 5th is the next eclipse, but there's another one on the 21st of June. So these are going to be significant, whether they coincide with some cure or some development that helps us understand this virus better, because we don't understand it. But, that's really linking it to the times that we live in. What I would say about eclipses is that they are times of sort of stress in many ways, but that can be a very good thing. because they bring simmering situations up to the bubble, so we get to resolve them. So they serve a really good purpose. But they'll also throw things into our midst that we're not used to, that we haven't encountered before. And that's, again, if you want to think of it psychologically, it's conducive to our personal growth. And it's conducive in terms of globally as well, you know, how we deal with major problems that just appear out of nowhere, which is often signaled by an eclipse. You know, that serves, it serves a purpose. It isn't just a random thing, you know?
But astrology's got into quite a lot of trouble recently with people saying that a lot of people didn't predict the coronavirus. I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Well, there are two ways to look at this. I mean, if you're an astrologer and you're working in the press, you've got columns, you know, which are in magazines or online. You have to be terribly careful what you say. I mean, you can't go scaremongering. I mean, it's irresponsible. So what you do is that you set something out in a way that, again, makes you feel as though you have power over this. This isn't something that's going to happen that you have no power over. So how you point out these points and these developments is absolutely crucial. And I think most good astrologers did say something about this. You know, I mean, I know Jessica certainly did in her website.
That's correct, yes.
And I said so myself. I said, you know, that at some, you know, there was going to be a global economic crash. And I warned a lot of my clients, and many of my articles that have been out talked about the economy taking a complete nosedive for a random reason, you know, starting from the January of 2020. So I feel we can cope with the idea of a global economic crash because it, you know, we think, oh, the economy, so what? So we'll, you know, have a recession again. You know, we don't always relate that to how destabilizing that can be country by country. So first and foremost, it's that you don't scare people. And I mean, it's the same really with, you know, public figures. You can't really make comments on public figures. You've got to imagine that you'd read that yourself. And how would you like to read that, you know, you're going to get sick or you're going to die or you're going to get divorced? You know, you have to be very careful. It's, you know, we straddle a fine line. But I don't think, I mean, if you're working one-on-one with someone, you can certainly measure your words, but you should still be able to give out the information that they will then be able to use carefully.
And can you see a future, a clearer future? Can you see when it's about to finish? How much longer have we got?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a long time. And the interesting thing, I just wrote a piece on my website this past week about it, looking at the astrological signature on the virus, which I've given to Neptune because it's such a mysterious virus. It kind of arrived mysteriously. It has a lot of very strange effects. First we thought it was respiratory, then it's gone and it can affect the heart, it can affect the feet. First we thought it's only the elderly that are vulnerable. No, now we found everybody's vulnerable. And now children who are supposed to be, you know, completely well, not immune to it, but immune to some of the more severe effects. There's now a new development coming there with this Kawasaki-like syndrome. So we don't know a lot about this virus, and it constantly transforms itself. And there have been a lot of astrologers who've come out and said it's going to disappear as quickly as it came. I think there's a lot of danger in that because although it may disappear, it'll be back. This is one of those viruses that's very sneaky. So, you know, when we think we might have got the measure on it, and, you know, that's just the moment you need to think, right, we need to stock up on more PPEs. We need to get the ventilators in. We need to draw in more medical staff because it will come back. And I think we're looking at least until the end of January or early February before I think we really get a handle on this, you know.
What, next year you're talking about?
Yeah, well, yes. Looking at the future here in terms of, you know, will it be a different world after the coronavirus? Yes, it will be. But And what's so interesting is that we will, from December, have Saturn going into Aquarius, Jupiter going into Aquarius, and then in 2024, we'll have Pluto in Aquarius. So we've got 3 really major prime movers among the planets heading into this sign, which is very progressive, it's very technological. And so we can see a lot of, scientific breakthroughs occurring. We'll live life differently. Often with Aquarius, we think about not doing the normal things. So it's more community oriented. So I think we'll have, what this pandemic has caused us to do is to reevaluate our priorities. We started to think, do we really need to live in the city? Why, we're now getting used to using all these virtual meeting opportunities. So life will change, and people have also understood, what is a priority? My life is a priority, and maybe into all of that comes the idea of climate and the ecology. People are getting a real grip on how things work. We're listening to science. We're thinking about, the future. So I think it'll make a positive difference, the virus, in that it's plunged us into this sense of awakening. I like to think really about Aquarius and planet Uranus as the awakeners. So we were awakening to a new world. So I think it will have a good effect. What I'm also looking at in terms of how planets moving to Aquarius and really stamp that sign on the globe, really, its society and everything else that we might think in terms of humanity, is that it is also at the same time as it offers a sense of community and brotherhood and all those things, it's also quite repressive in a way as well. And I think the idea that in order to have the freedoms we want and life in a way that is safe for us, then there's still more restrictions to come in terms of governments. So I think it would be a false dawn to think just because Aquarius sounds like this wonderful humanitarian sign, it's all going to be wonderful from, 2021 onwards. There is, there's always a dark side to every planet and every sign. And that dark side to Aquarius is very regimented, it's very repressive. So we can't forget that.
And are there any star signs that do well under lockdown, or is some star sign going to do better than another, or sort of health-wise or mental health-wise, or,
yeah, I think
you want to be a Libra now, is what I'm asking.
That's a very good question, because, a lot of people think, sun signs, what are sun signs? 12 of the population are all Aries or all Taurus, so that's useless. But it is like a kind of brand. It is an identity. We're sharing some kind of common features. And I think, when you look at how people handle it, let's take the air signs, which are Gemini and Libra in particular. We've got Aquarius in there as well. I'm going to keep that out for a minute. Then these air signs require freedom. They want freedom of movement, freedom of speech. They don't want to feel closeted or contained. So I think you find Gemini in particular very uncomfortable in a lockdown situation.
Oh, honestly, that is my husband and my daughter. We're a whole household of air signs. So it's quite fractious.
I did a little video on this, and I remember coming to Aquarius and saying, because Aquarius is an air sign as well, the idea that all airy people need room to breathe and to share ideas. And I thought, well, Aquarius is kind of different because it's a fixed sign. And I said, what you need to do in a lockdown situation where you're all bundled together in a small house or in an apartment is that the Aquarius needs to create a space. So it needs to build it, maybe with a, some kind of, just an area that is actually defined for him or her. And then they can go into their area. They have their own space. And then that gives them a feeling they're going to that space, and they come out and be in another space. So I think there are signs that will handle it better. I think the water signs are better.
The water signs, right.
Yeah, definitely, because they like home comforts. They like.
Which ones are those, the water signs? Sorry, which ones are the water signs?
We've got Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So they tend to be very fluid and you know, as long as they've got their emotional needs and their comfort factors, they're probably reasonably content to be in one spot. Also about the air signs, very sociable, and the water signs, much, you know, they tend to like certain people or be close to their family. So although they might miss their family if they're in lockdown without them, it's still a safe place to be. That's what, of course, I say all this stuff, and then I think of, you know, people who may be a Scorpio, maybe a Cancer, and what do they have? They have Uranus rising, and so they're going to say, I hate this. I don't find any part of lockdown good. So there's always going to be variations on this theme. These are really generalities. I think fire signs are very creative. So even though they, like the air signs, are sociable, need to get out a bit and need to feel that life is moving, they're very creative, and so they'll make use of their time creatively.
So which ones are the fire ones then?
Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. They can get itchy feet, but the creative side of life is important. The earth signs, and this is Capricorn, Taurus, and Virgo, then they too are quite kind of rooted, and they're disciplined in a way. They work with what they've got, the earth signs. So if that's what they've got, they'll work with it. You know, they're practically minded. But they're generalities, as I say.
And so you were famously Princess Diana's astrologer. And do you now, is big business engaged in, do you help, you know, big companies? I wondered what the practical application was of astrology.
Well, I know there are astrologers who work with companies, astrologers who work in finance, but I'm not one of them. I work strictly on an individual basis. So I have clients across the world, in all walks of life. And, you know, I often say to my partner, I think I'm so blessed. I have the most wonderful clients. I mean, don't ask me how many, because I've been working in consultation for 30 years. So I have an amazing amount of clients, but I don't think I've ever had a client who I didn't like, or who I didn't find a resonance with, and that I really wasn't able to help, or, you know, so it's, you know, it's not that I have famous people or big companies or those kind of things. It's a very individual thing, very personal thing.
And how much science is involved in the astrology? Because I've seen, you know, the idea of your birth chart, it's incredibly accurate and difficult. And I mean, what's your training, and how did you become part of all of this? I read that you were a dancer. Is that correct? Ballet dancer.
I was in the Royal Ballet. Yeah, so yes, right from when I was 12, I went to the junior school, White Lodge, and up through to the senior school and into the company. So, but I was always interested in astrology, and I always thought that I had my chart done when I was 19, just before I got into the company, in fact. And the astrologer who did that for me, Ingrid Lind, she became my mentor. And it was really through conversations with her and being exposed to all the things that astrology kind of opens you up to, that made me decide whenever I had the opportunity, I would go and learn astrology. And so I went to the Faculty of Astrological Studies and did a 4-year course and got my diploma, and so it began. But the idea, I mean, when I started astrology, we really didn't have computerized things. We had calculators, but that was about it. And I'm not really a maths person, but I had to learn how to actually accurately, you know, get the planetary positions. I had to, you know, accurately place those planets in the right section of the horizon and under the horizon. And it used to take me 1 hour and a book of logarithms and all sorts of other little tables to be able to get that circle of the chart out with all the planets and their degrees in it. 1 hour, and that was speedy. God helped me when I had to do a Southern Hemisphere birth, and I had to turn everything upside down, and it was very complicated. But now we all have software programs. These are done, high tech. So now I feed in the data, date, time, place of birth, and within 5 seconds, I've got the whole thing. So I don't need to spend a lot of time figuring out where everything is. That is the science bit. It's all about the art. It's about what does it mean?
And the interpretation of the facts, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, again, here we go. If you think of astrology, isn't a science, and it's scientific in the way it's constructed. And any astronomer would be able to look at a chart and see that that's where the planets are, and that's an accurate chart. But an astronomer or a scientist would say that's all it means. We just know they're there. We know the reality of Saturn. We know how far it is from the sun. We know its behavior. We know what those rings are, but it doesn't mean anything. Whereas astrologers say where the planets are, that has meaning for us. We are connected. And it sounds really like kind of hippy dippy thing, you know, somehow we're all connected with everything in the universe. But there may be something in the idea of subatomic particles. You know, there is this thing that one subatomic particle, when it meets another one, it never forgets it. It always knows where it is at any time. And if you think about the Big Bang, and every part of us is part of Saturn and Uranus and all these other planets, maybe there is some infinite, mysterious subatomic connection. And it does sound ludicrous, but you know, we're no nearer a finite explanation for how astrology works. But it's been with us for thousands upon thousands of years. And it's a beautiful thing to watch as you see life unfolding. And, you know, for instance, on January the 10th last year, to see this massive eclipse and everything happening and saying, right, this is the beginning of something absolutely monumental. A lot of change, a lot of things to do with the changing of borders. And bang on the button, the coronavirus came into consciousness. It obviously had its birth sometime in November or December when people started to catch it. But we, in terms of the globe, everybody, ordinary people, it was January that we began to get news of this virus that was not exactly decimating China, but certainly very, very infectious. So, you know, we saw that coming ahead, and you see it. And in fact, I think on the day of that eclipse and all those accompanying alignments, that was the day the genome, it's how the, you know, how its genome, what its genome was passed through to all the other scientists. So it was, you know, astrology can be a beautiful thing looked at like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, kings and queens of Europe for centuries used to have their own personal astrologers. I mean, Elizabeth I had, what's his name? I forgot his name.
John Dee,
that's right.
Yeah.
It was
an extraordinary man and a great, I mean, what, you know, one of the great intellectuals of history. He's a very interesting man. And yes,
very interesting, yeah.
Was designed. And it's interesting that you've mentioned that, because Charles and Diana, they married on a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, 31st of July, 1981. And not just the eclipse, but also Jupiter and Saturn were in conjunction, they were close together. And, you know, whenever you're thinking of matters of state and matters of monarchy, you'd want to have Jupiter and Saturn very prominent. So we have this perfect chart of majesty, really, on that day. But you can't control what happens. And this is what's so interesting about eclipses, total solar eclipse, that you could say this was a great celebration, as it was. If we remember that day, how wonderful it was. But of course, this changed the monarchy. The monarchy was forever changed because of this marriage. And you so put a special event on an eclipse at your peril. Be careful. They're kind of hot to handle.
Absolutely. So have you looked at Harry and Meghan's charts then?
Oh my goodness. Now, inasmuch as Charles and Diana may have had a little help with that wedding, somebody definitely had a little bit of, let's do it on this day. But Meghan and Harry definitely didn't, because there isn't an astrologer worth his or her salt that would choose to to have a wedding on an aspect between Mars and Uranus. Uranus is all about change and breaking, and I mean, it just, and the day itself, there was nothing but controversy about that wedding, what with her father not coming, and, you know, Charles having to walk the mother down. It was absolutely, it broke all conventions. When you think about the wedding itself, which was a beautiful thing to watch, but it broke with convention. And in no time at all, they already broke with convention, Meghan and Harry. So in a way, you can say they got married at the right time, because this reflects who they are. They are a Mars-Uranus couple. They're never going to do it the way everybody does it. They're going to create their, or blaze their own trail, and they have done since. And we'll have to wait and see just how they evolve as a couple. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that they aren't deeply in love with each other. I think that's very clear. But just how they will handle their very different astrology and the astrology of the moments they have when they've made these decisions. They quit. They left England on that eclipse, right?
Wow.
Well, they didn't leave. Well, I mean, that's when it all came out. The 8th of January was when they put that Instagram notice up. You know, we are, you know, folding back on our duties. That came on the eclipse as well. So, you know, things change, monarchies changed, constitutions change, life changed from that eclipse. And we'll hear more as we come to these new eclipses coming up. There will be more stuff, whether it is to do with Meghan and Harry, whether it is to do with the royal family. And I am quite interested that so many things I could talk about. Everybody's going to be bored if not careful, but I'm a passionate astrologer. Both the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate, and Prince William were both born on eclipses. She was born on a lunar eclipse, Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Cancer, and her birthday is the 10th of January. So that eclipse repeated itself when this year, and that's when she was born on exactly the same eclipse. For the same for Prince William, he was born on an eclipse, a solar eclipse. And guess what? This year, his birthday also falls on a solar eclipse. So we just have to know this is a massive year for William and Kate. Quite how it will turn out, but one suspects that they're taking on of roles. They're going to have a much, much bigger, more important role than they have had. And maybe we can already see a bit of that evolving already, but I suspect there'll be some dramatic turns of events as we go through 2020.
And are you ever taken by surprise and then you just have to go back to the chart and go, oh my God, of course I missed that?
Yes, of course, I'm human. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was funny. This is actually personal rather than we're talking about major world events. But I remember losing a very big contract. It was a really big one, and I was very happy working with this magazine and everything, and suddenly gone. And I thought, what was that? And I went and looked at my chart and I thought, oh, of course, why hadn't I noticed that before? I could have prepared for this. So yes, I mean, you do get caught out, because the other thing is, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, because we are so dependent on horoscopes. So we have to have a horoscope in front of us. We have to have a horoscope of a person. We have to have a horoscope of a country. And if we don't have that, we can't see what's in line for that person or that country. So when an event happens, let's say an earthquake or a coup, some kind of political coup, unless we happen to have the country Venezuela in front of us at the time, you know, we're taking a special interest in Venezuela, we might miss the eclipse on the MCIC axis that would definitely say, oh, big change of government here. So it's not as easy. So it's not like we just tune in to the cosmos and all these events appear to us, you know, in our mind. It's hard work. You know, we study charts. We think, you know, based on our experience, we know how these alignments work in this case. And again, nothing is ever the same. It's like a kaleidoscope. When you look at those little children's toys and you twist it, and we get a different pattern every time. That's how the pattern of the planetary patterns are as well. You never get the same pattern twice. You get one configuration that's happened every 20 years, but of course the next time it happens, it's in a completely different, in the company of other different alignments. So it's a challenge.
It sounds amazing. Listen, Penny, thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but unfortunately we can't. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, that's been my pleasure.
And good luck with your big meetup this evening.
Thank you.